Good morning and welcome everyone. Council is convened for 3 work sessions this morning, February 4th, 2026, and we'll kick it off with CTRAN. Scott Patterson, thanks so much for being here. Yep, you're up right away. Scott's the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of CTRAN. So, and I just to introduce this a little bit, I invited Scott to be here, and I think we're all aware of the board composition committee and some of the struggles that we've had. And one of the potential solutions, or maybe to alleviate some concerns about who pays for what, is the high capacity transit subdistrict. So that's what we're going to learn about. There may be a vote at the next CTRAN meeting, so we'll be informed. Oh, just press the button.
How's that? Now we're good. Thank you very much, Chair Marshall. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've had the opportunity, I think, on a couple of occasions to be in front of the council talking about CTRAN's participation in the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. A lot has happened over this past year. Sometimes I even ask myself, has it only been a year since we started having some of these conversations? But it has. Wanted to take the opportunity to talk about an issue that has recently surfaced to a larger extent at the CTRAN Board of Directors. And I will also note that we'll be giving a very similar presentation to the CTRAN Board at next week's meeting as well. But wanted to kind of walk you through, if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. What I want to be covering is I do want to spend just a little bit of time on just kind of reviewing where we've been specifically for the IBR light rail transit potential operation and maintenance funding options. Also want to give just a brief overview of CTRAN's current sales tax and where we stand in that regard. And then really want to focus in on the high capacity transit subdistrict option that is in front of the board as one of the potential options to help fund IBR light rail O&M. And then talk a little bit about the process that also was involved, not just as it relates to the subdistrict, but using the state's High Capacity Transit Act, which CTRAN had done back in 2012 as part of the then Columbia River Crossing project. And so there's a number of requirements that I just wanted to make this council, and we'll make the CTRAN board aware of at the meeting next month. So if we could move to the next slide. So CTRAN's currently adopted language in regards to potentially funding light rail O&M as part of the IBR project. Just wanted to recap what that is. And it reads that CTRAN may participate in funding the operations and maintenance of the bi-state transit, including any new park and rides that may be constructed or co-located station maintenance, security, and other operational support as agreed to and part of the project. Next slide. So there are a few different taxing options that CTRAN has available to it. All of them require a public vote, and that is the case for all public transit agencies in the state of Washington, and it really has been since the Public Transit Act, RCW 3657, came into existence. First is under RCW 8214-105, CTRAN has the authority to seek voter approval for either a 1/10 or a 0.2% sales tax increase. And this is the originating RCW that deals with primarily bus transit, core bus, paratransit, and things, the services that CTRAN provides today. CTRAN currently collects 7/10, so we have 2/10 authority remaining. But we also are going through finalizing our CTRAN long-range plan, our CTRAN 2045 plan. And based on where that is heading, we are at this point, even though it's still a draft plan, assuming that we would need that final 2/10 to be able to sustain and preserve the service levels that we'll have come 2030 and beyond, as well as potentially providing some minimal expansion. And so Those conversations are continuing and will be a significant part of our full day board workshop that we haven't yet scheduled, but likely will take place in the second quarter, April-ish, we think at this point. So more discussion at the CTRAN board. And then moving on to the other option, and this is the state's High Capacity Transit Act. This is RCW 81104, and it also provides CTRAN as it relates specifically to high capacity transit, so light rail. We could also seek a voter approved PTBA, that's CTRAN's boundary, wide sales tax up to 0.9%. We also have the option in subsection 200 that we'll talk more about here in a moment to do a sub-district, a smaller district, but also up to 0.9%. And then there's an additional option allowed in the RCWs, and this is subsection 150, that would allow an HCT employer tax either in a sub-district that's been established or a full CTRAN's full district. And this would be also require voter approval up to $2 per month per employee. So those are the 3 or 4 options contained under the state's High Capacity Transit Act. Next slide. So going to subsection 200, it's a fun read. I've read this act probably more times than I would like to admit, but and there's a lot of details that I'm not, and we really don't have time to cover, but I wanted to hit the high points. So beginning with the establishment of the high capacity transportation corridor area. And when you see the term corridor area in the RCW, this is what we refer to as a sub-district. It just makes it a little bit more clear. So the language in it reads that it may include all or a portion of a city or town as long as all or a portion of the city or town boundaries are within the boundaries of the establishing agency. In this case, that means CTRAN. If you look at our PTBA today, we have the city of Vancouver, the Vancouver urban growth area as it was established or as it was in place in 2005. And then we have the incorporated cities, Camas, Washougal, Battleground, Ridgefield, La Center, and the town of Yakult. So that is our board. And then that board would also serve as the governing board of any potential future subdistrict. Next slide. So this would need to be approved by a majority vote within the sub-district. And an important point here is that once you have one successful vote within a sub-district, there are no further votes allowed within just that sub-district. This would mean if CTRAN creates a sub-district and the voters approve it for funding, in this case, the light rail component of the IBR program, any subsequent votes to expand high capacity transit would require, without any further changes in the RCW, would require the full district to vote on that. So you get one successful vote. So that is just the way the current wording is in the RCW. Next slide. This is the visual depiction of what I just mentioned to you, and this is our current district-wide boundary. I just wanted to make sure it was in the presentation. Here is a good reference point as we kind of continue to discuss and explore options going forward. Next slide. So the High Capacity Transit Act has a number of detailed things that any proposing agency like CTRAN would be required to do. So should the CTRAN board direct staff to pursue any funding from RCW 81104, whether it would be through a sub-district or the full PTBA, there's other requirements, and I just want to focus on a few of them here this morning. First is the formation of a regional policy committee. This could or would likely be the full CTRAN board of directors plus one appointed representative from the Washington State Department of Transportation. So when CTRAN began this process back in 2010 as part of that Columbia River Crossing project, our regional policy committee was the CTRAN board plus one representative from WashDOT. That board has the authority to kind of oversee the development, and this would be a CTRAN responsibility, CTRAN staff, the development of a high capacity transit system and finance plan. That system and finance plan that was developed back in the early 2010s was a significant, undertaking. You have to show not just the ability to be able to fund near-term O&M and capital, but you have to go longer term, usually it's typically 20 to 25 or 30 years. That's one of the things that the Federal Transit Administration also takes a very close look at as they're evaluating and rating the project as we go through that CIG or capital investment grant pipeline with them. The act also requires the appointment of an expert review panel, and they would be appointed by the governor of Washington and the chairs of the House and Senate Transportation Committees. This is also something that CTRAN did back in those early 2010s as well. Next slide. Oh, you're already there. Thank you. The expert review panel would be reviewing all the reports that are required and referenced in subsection 100 of the High Capacity Transit Act. The expert review panel would be providing timely reviews, comments on individual reports, and ultimately study conclusions to what would then be CTRAN's Regional Policy Committee. And then once all of the requirements that are contained within 81104 have been met and the ERP, the expert review panel, has completed its work, CTRAN's Regional Policy Committee could approve the final HCT system and finance plan, and then that would allow ultimately a ballot measure to go in front of the voters. So there's a lot of detail behind this. I've mentioned to a couple of people, I spent a fair amount of time going back into some of the CTRAN archives and pulling out documents from those days, and it brought back a lot of memories. It was an interesting process. It was very comprehensive. So at this point, I think I'm just happy to answer any questions if you have any at this time.
Great, thanks. This was very helpful. Any questions immediately from the council?
I've got a couple.
I bet. Go ahead.
So first of all, I'm wanting to clarify a couple things. So the tax is allowed to go, a voter approved, up to 0.9%. So if you do one of the smaller district and you put a measure forward and it's approved, let's say, I'm just going to pick a number 0.2.
Mm-hmm.
That's the last time you can't do any more ballot measures in that group. Now it has to expand to the entire base.
Right.
So then then if we went to the entire base and we asked for a certain amount, at that point, would that measure balance out to where everybody was paying the same, or would the smaller districts still be paying more?
The smaller district, it's my understanding that the smaller district would still be paying more.
Okay. And then do you know what the kind of the nuance is behind only allowing one time?
I'm trying to go way back in my memory bank, which is getting more limited, it feels like. But my recollection on some of the conversations that were happening is that you don't create a small district, so small of a district that you're able to just do a small district here and a small district here and a small district here, but that you have the opportunity to get one in the first leg of a high capacity transit plan, if you will, And then as you expand out, you need to go back and have it be the full district.
Okay, I think that, I mean, it kind of makes sense, and I think it really fits our community in the sense that, you know, light rail is much more highly supported by people that live in the inner core, and I think that they also will largely benefit more from it since it's going to be close to them. You know, the further out you go, the less direct benefit there are to people. So, but once that system is established and as it starts to expand out, you can see a broader impact and benefit. So I appreciate those comments. It's an interesting subject and looking forward to working through it. And I'm curious what the other counselors have to say.
Chair, just a quick question. So the sub-districts can only be created within the existing taxing boundaries?
Correct.
Okay, all right. So Ridgefield could be one sub-district?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think
They probably wouldn't be happy
sub-district,
about
there
that,
would need
but-
to be, some legal review and input on this because it would have to be the investment would have to be contained within the district. So, if I understand the question correctly, are you envisioning an opportunity for an individual city to say we want to be our own sub-district, or
Hypothetically, yes.
Hypothetically,
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, that's
Not
something
that it's
would
going to happen.
require
I don't think
further
the
research,
city of
but yeah.
Ridgefield would be amenable to that. I think that the sub-district that some of us might consider would be the city of Vancouver within the urban, unincorporated urban Clark County, urban unincorporated Clark County. So, okay, I'm just curious about what that looks like. Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions?
Yeah, I'm just curious about how these sub-districts are created, because I'm concerned about who's taxed and who's not taxed.
Sure.
Yeah, how is it created? Who votes on it? When are these decisions made?
Yeah, so it would fall entirely under the purview of the CTRAN Board of Directors. So the CTRAN board, when it would, this is what happened in 2010. The CTRAN board directed staff to begin meeting all of the requirements of 81104 in order to place an HCT ballot measure. It did not decide to use or implement the sub-district option. The CTRAN board at that time decided to remain district-wide. But I think what staff's recommendation would be to the CTRAN board, and I want to be careful about not getting too far down the road here, but that it would need to happen at the front end, and it could happen as part of their initial action that would direct CTRAN staff to begin the 81104 process. And there may be a number of months with some different options for sub-district boundaries, but I think it needs to be, the reason I would recommend it happening on the front end of that process is a lot of the funding analysis needs to be done based on a specific geography, because we know PTBA wide what a 0.1% sales tax would bring in. But as you start carving that down a little bit, we'd want to be able to understand what those are. So my recommendation, at least, would be to have the CTRAN board, and then perhaps it's the regional policy committee that would be the CTRAN board plus the one WSDOT rep, ultimately make that decision, but make it earlier rather than later. I don't know if that helps answer the question.
Okay, it does. And I also was curious if the $2 per month employer tax comes up with the similar amount of funding as the 0.9%.
The short answer is I don't know, but that is something that we would be able to do some analysis on in relatively short order.
Thank you.
Councillor Belcott.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Scott. I've noticed that the budget deficit with TriMet Oregon Light Rail has gone from 74 million now to 300 million, and they're going to be shutting down some more light rail lines this August. What legal protection can our taxpayers expect to protect us from financial burdens like that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. if we go down the high capacity transit sub-district or full district process, where those provisions would be built in would ultimately be an agreement that would have to be executed and approved by the CTRAN board with TriMet that would lay out all of the different components. There was an agreement with TriMet back in the Columbia River Crossing project, and we would have to do something very similar to that. It would be kind of separate and apart from the expert review panel and the State's High Capacity Transit Act. But as the project advances into further into the Capital Investment Grant Program for FTA, we would have to negotiate and execute a contract, and that would be the opportunity to consider some provisions that would address some of the TriMet issues as well.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about that since they're the owner and operators of light rail and they're going bankrupt, that we are going to inherit those problems for our taxpayers. So thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I think that this as a option came up out of concern that some of the small cities had, that they would be obligated to pay for light rail and they wouldn't, their citizens wouldn't be using it. And they and some have suggested they would just pull out of CTRAN altogether, because so to protect their taxpayers from having to fund anything. And there hasn't been a specific dollar amount, or it's just permissive language that was put into the CTRAN rules. So we don't know. There's a lot that we don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. And there would have to be, and because, while we went through this process a number of years ago, the conditions now are different than they were back then. And so we just, at this point, because we're starting to get a lot of questions related to the board composition review, that we thought this would at least be a good starting point to get the information out there and start that conversation about what that process would look like going forward. And ultimately it will be a decision that the CTRAN board will have to make. And whether that happens, in the next, within the next month or two or a year from now, there's that opportunity to still have this be part of the overall conversation.
Right. Guess with all those uncertainties, it's hard to know what to continue to ask to help clarify things. So I guess I'm wondering about the timing, because, and that the board composition review committee has tried to have conditions based on compliance with the state law. That's how I would summarize that.
Yes. Yeah.
And they really don't have authority to do this. So this was seen as a way to alleviate some of those fears about their citizens paying for something that they may not use or might not use for some time.
Sure.
But this would be a decision solely rests with the CTRAN board, correct?
That is correct. I will say the CTRAN board / potentially if the CTRAN board would take the action to direct going down the 81-104 process. And so I believe it may have to be the regional policy committee, which is the CTRAN board plus one member from WSDOT, that would take the action that would officially approve the subdistrict going forward.
And what would be a reasonable time frame for this to?
Yeah.
Because it seems like there's a lot just to
Sure.
form this.
Well, there's not a lot to form it. The CTRAN board could make a motion, could take action to direct staff to begin this process. And I think the first step in that process is coming back and forming the regional policy committee, where they would name themselves and one WSDOT rep, and they could begin meeting kind of the process that took place in the early 2010s is we would have, you know, a regional policy committee meeting an hour before the regular CTRAN board meeting, kind of similar to what we've done with some of the board composition review committee meetings to make sure we're not, you know, having them on different days. And they could then, as one of their first acts, the regional policy committee, if they so chose, could decide on the sub-district and draw those lines and name it and take action to approve it. And then that would then allow CTRAN to move forward in developing the system and finance plan and reaching out to the state for the expert review panel. And then you have all those other components, some of which I reviewed, you know, with you earlier. The process in the early 2010s from that first CTRAN board action to the ballot measure was just a little more than 2 years to get from beginning to end. You could probably, depending on the specifics involved, you could probably maybe do it in 18 months, but I think 18 to 24 months is probably a pretty good idea of meeting, you know, going through the entire process, including potentially having a ballot measure to be voted on as well. But the initial action in establishing the subdistrict can be in the next couple of months, I would assume, if there was interest and support to do that.
That's good to know. Other questions? Yeah.
Is there a way to create a tax, like a fourth option, instead of creating a sub-district, you're creating a percent based on proximity to the corridor, like the farther away, the less tax, opposed to a hard boundary?
Yeah, it's a great question. My understanding is current state law does not allow us the opportunity to do that. We would need to confer with legal counsel on that, but I don't believe there's any allowance in the RCW specific to transit funding that would allow that.
It would be good to know that for sure, I think.
Yeah.
My guess would be that wouldn't be possible because it goes by 0.1%. You know, what do you do? 0.05%. I think everything that I've ever seen is always in 0.1% increments with sales tax. But
That is correct. Actually, now that you mentioned that. Yeah.
But the employer tax.
Okay. We'll do some research on that.
So it sounds like this could be done a little bit incrementally. There'll be decision points along the way as we gain additional information.
Yes, assuming the CTRAN board does in fact take action to direct staff to begin that process.
Okay, we may find out next week. Oh, yes, Councilor Belcott.
Yeah, I have another question. Scott, I'm going to ask you a question you probably can't answer. But since the smaller cities aren't interested in light rail or the O&M expenses, I don't know if it's been explored to have the composition board just made up of city members, since it seems like the driving factor is City of Vancouver. Or I know that some of the smaller cities have talked about dropping off the CTRAN board because, again, the light rail issue. And then like the whole composition board just being revised and have the city responsible. I mean, is that even a possibility? You know? Maybe that's a lawyer question.
That's yeah. I'm gonna try to.
I don't want to put you in
I don't think. Yeah. I will say that the RCWs that establish the board composition review committee, it's pretty clear that each member city gets one member, and then the county it's the full county legislative authority. So the county council gets up to 5. So if there were one or more member cities that took action to withdraw from CTRAN, then they would no longer have that seat at future board composition review committees. So it's really linked to who the member cities are. So If the current 432 for Vancouver, 3 county, 2 shared seats from the smaller cities was to ultimately take effect, you would still have the board composition review committee membership in the future be what it is today, unless individual cities take action to remove themselves.
Yeah, and then, well, those cities that remove themselves wouldn't be paying into CTRAN at all. So that would make sense that they wouldn't have any representation because they wouldn't be participating. I know that Sandy's done that in Oregon with TriMet. They removed themselves from taxing their folks on it because they, they're a more rural area. So they just didn't think that the expense justified the tax. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Or just one
Yes.
quick comment. Just kind of sitting here thinking about the composition of these different groups that would be established and the mention of WashDOT. Obviously, I'm not the decision maker on this, but I would prefer that a member from WashDOT be there as a non-voting member. I think their expertise, their support, their recommendations are important for the group, but I do want this decision to be local. So that would be my preference on that seat.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I know that the current wording in the RCW makes it pretty clear that they'd be a voting member, but you'd have 9 voting board members from CTRAN, and then WashDOT would just have the 1. But I hear what you're saying, and it would take a change in the RCW to make it a non-voting. But
Great. Any other questions? Don't see any more questions. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
we'll look forward to next week where some decisions may be made.
all right, thank you.
Very helpful. Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
Thanks.